Hey, this is Charles with Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to diagnose problems with the hydraulic clutch on your dirt bike. These hydraulic clutches are nice because they offer that smooth, consistent feel and they're low maintenance, but eventually you could run into some issues with them. So finding those issues could be kind of hard unless you know what to look for. Now, some common issues with these hydraulic clutches are a lever that is spongy. So when you pull it in, it's not going to fully disengage the clutch and the bike's going to want to creep forward just a little bit. Or you might not have any pressure at the lever at all. Now, a less likely problem would be a lever that's either hard to pull in or doesn't pull in at all, but it can happen. So we're going to show you how to pinpoint what the problem is that you're having with your clutch. And the process will be similar for just about any dirt bike out there with a hydraulic clutch. So let's go ahead and jump into this so you can get the problem fixed and get back out riding. To do this job, we have some common hand tools, safety glasses, rubber gloves, some rags, and then as far as bleeding and flushing the hydraulic system goes, we have this KTM syringe available on our website under the OEM diagram. And then as an alternate, you can use this Tusk brake bleeder vacuum pump kit. Now, even though this says brakes on it, it's also going to work for the hydraulic system on your clutch. And then of course, you want a drain pan to dump all that fluid into. Now, as far as parts and consumables go, I do want to point out that there are two different styles of clutches. One's going to use a brake fluid and one will use a mineral oil. So you want to refer to your model specific service manual and find out which fluid your machine uses. And then the other parts, it really depends on what you find in your diagnosis. So we have master cylinder rebuild kits, slave cylinder rebuild kits, or any other parts that you might need. We have a lot of different options available on our website. We also have cleaners. You want to make sure you clean up any spills. And we have all of this stuff in the link in the description below just to make things easier. So let's go ahead and find out what's going on with our bike. We're going to start by diagnosing the most common problems first, and then we'll get into some of the less common problems later on. And the first thing we need to do in those steps is verify that we do have a problem. So these levers, they're going to have a specified amount of free play found in the service manual. So ours just has a little bit of free play right there. That's what we want. And then you want to pull on it, make sure it has a smooth, consistent action all the way through it. And the reason we're checking that is a dragging clutch can also be caused by other things, like if you have your clutch basket, the fingers on that, if they're grooved out, the clutch plates can actually stick on it and it's going to make the clutch drag. So verify that it is the hydraulic system that has the problem. Now, if you have a problem with the hydraulic system, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have a lot of free play. So we don't start to get resistance until about right there. And then we feel some pressure. It's going to feel spongy. So we need to find out what's going on with this, or it could just be no pressure all the way down. So let's go ahead and we're going to take off the reservoir cap on the master cylinder and inspect this fluid. Now, this fluid is going to tell you a couple different things. First off, we're going to look and see if the level is actually low. If the fluid level is way low, then we probably have a leak somewhere in the system, whether it be on the slave cylinder or an external leak where one of the banjo fittings are, or even up by this master cylinder. So if it is low, you want to go through and check those things. Now, I do want to point out that, this fluid, eventually it can get contaminated. That's why it has a service interval. So depending on your bike, it's either going to be flushed out every year or every other year. Again, refer to your model specific service manual for that. But we're going to focus on the leaks first, and then we'll show you a little bit about flushing and bleeding this system. So our fluid level, it's a little bit lower than it should be, but not much. And normal clutch wear, this fluid might drop just a little bit. That's fine. If it's really low, then you probably have a problem with a leak. But we'll go ahead and go through the system, just verify that we don't have any leaks. So now that I've removed the clutch lever, you can see this plunger right here, this presses on that piston. And This is where you can get a leak from this master cylinder. So if you don't see any fluid right here, you're probably good. But if you suspect that you might have a leak, you can also pull this plunger out and verify you don't have a bunch of fluid that's pooled up in this rubber piece. Just keep in mind that these plungers can be a little tricky to get back in place. All right, moving on. If you don't have a leak at that end of the master cylinder, you want to look where the line is coming out of the master cylinder. And we actually do have a little bit of a leak right here on ours. So what we're going to do is make sure that these fittings are nice and tight, snug down all the way. And if you actually have damage to the line, then you're going to have to replace it. So right here by the steering stem, you want to verify that the line is routed correctly, because what happens sometimes if they're not routed correctly, as the bar turns, the line can actually get pinched and sometimes it can get cut open. And then we'll keep following that down to the slave cylinder. And again, if it's pinched or damaged, you want to replace that line. So the next place to check for leaks is down by this banjo fitting. You want to make sure it's not coming from either of those sealing washers. And then also the bleeder nipple can also be coming from there. If you don't have any leaks from there and you had low fluid level, the next step for you would be to remove the slave cylinder, and we'll check for leaks on the inside of it. Now to gain access to the slave cylinder on the KTM and Husky bikes, we got to remove the chain guard. So there's a bolt right behind this frame, and then we have 3 bolts on that slave cylinder. All right, now that we have the slave cylinder off, I want to show you the most common problem I've seen on these Husky and KTM bikes, and it's the O-ring on that slave cylinder. Now, what we have right here, this seals the slave cylinder from our transmission oil. But on this, if we peel this seal up, you can actually look down at the slave cylinder, and if this is leaking, you'll see a little bit of rubber chunks, and that tells you that that seal is coming apart. Now you can see on this one, there is a little teeny rubber chunk, and you can kind of see on the edge some of that rubber is pulling over. So this one's definitely due for it. So those are the things you'll be checking if you have low fluid level in that master cylinder. But if you went to check this fluid and the level's okay, but it just looks dirty, the next step is to flush the system. Or even if it looks clean and the lever is just spongy and you suspect that air is in the system, this is what you need to do. So on these KTMs and Huskies, what you're gonna do is suck all of the fluid out of this master cylinder. There you can see in ours, we have a ton of just dirty old fluid down towards the bottom. We wanna make sure we get all of that out. Then we're gonna open the bleeder up down at that slave cylinder, and we'll suck all the fluid out of the system, and we're actually gonna reverse bleed this until we have no more air bubbles coming out at the master cylinder. So once you get all of the air pushed out by reverse bleeding, it's a good idea to actuate your lever a couple of times, make sure no more air bubbles come out. Then you'll make sure the fluid level is correct and reinstall your cap. The reverse bleeding procedure we just did is the best way to get all of the air out of the system on the KTM and Husky bikes. But if you're only replacing the fluid in that clutch master cylinder as part of your routine maintenance, then the best way to flush it is the same way we're gonna do it on this KX 450. And all we're gonna do is use that vacuum bleeder, and we're gonna make sure we keep this master cylinder full of fluid. We'll pump all the fluid out until fresh stuff goes into our bleeder, close the valve, and reinstall our cap. Now moving on to the less common issues, I have heard of slave cylinders that the bolts weren't tightened down on them, and you go to pull the clutch lever in and the slave cylinder actually moves away from the engine and it doesn't disengage your clutch. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And then as far as a lever that is hard to pull in, you want to check the condition of the lever and the pivot, make sure they're both in good condition, no damage, and make sure the pivot is lubed up. Now if the lever doesn't move in at all, what you want to do is remove this reservoir cap. Check the fluid. If the fluid's gelled up, chances are you're going to have to rebuild the entire hydraulic system. Now, if you want to find out exactly what's locked up on this system, what you would do is apply pressure to the lever, And then starting with the bleed nipple at the bottom, you're gonna crack it open. If fluid comes out, then you know you have a stuck slave cylinder piston. But if it doesn't come out, you just work your way up until you start seeing fluid come out. And at that point, you know the restriction is beyond where the fluid's coming out, and you need to get that section of the hydraulic system repaired. Now that you've diagnosed the problems with your hydraulic clutch, you can find the parts for your bike on our website. We have a lot of different options on there. We even have videos to show you how to install those parts. So be sure to check that out on our channel and subscribe. Thanks for watching.